and a romanization and a initial literal word by word or character by character translation. Then we showed you the modified, and then this is finally as polished as we feel we can get at this point. We've been working on this, and so what you're seeing up there is a English polished version of this writing from Dharma Master Hanshan, and it's called The Old Monk Hanshan's Reply to this officer or official Zheng, on the essentials, and then we're still working on this, but basically the essentials of self-cultivation or the essentials of cultivating the mind or just the essentials of practice, however you want to interpret that. And the reason why I really like using this text for the class is, first of all, anybody checking memory, anybody remember when this was written or put forth? And that would be about when?
1600.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking somewhere between 1550 to 1630 in that period. And then we did some comparisons what was going on in the world at the time, not a lot. People were still pretty much in a dream, unlike today. And that this officer who was something of a literati himself, a benefactor, we found out that he helped and met maybe Hanshan during famine relief in a part of China at one time, and was a cultivator. But he's asking the venerable monk to really lay out in a very simple, straightforward language, what's the heart of Buddhism? What's the heart of the Buddhist teaching? And particularly Buddhist practice. And the reason he's asking this, and we've talked about this again and again, Buddhism is really about a practice. It's a spiritual exercise aimed at awakening or opening up the full human potential. So while it does have teachings and doctrines and very elaborate texts that talk about all kinds of realms, the basic core of it is a very pragmatic, direct application of spiritual exercises meant to address, and you will see this in the first line, what they say is the one great matter, what is called the one great matter. So I'm hoping that because I don't like to turn around, I'm hoping that what I read here is exactly what's up there. So let's just read this first passage and go into it and talk about it a little bit. And this is from an interesting title that Hanshan gave to this writing and some of his other writings called Wandering in a Dream, which I really like. So he sees his own life and his teaching wandering in a dream, meaning that he's in a world where everybody is dreaming, and he's wandering in that dream world, perhaps also dreaming, but at the same time trying to set out messages or impulses that cause people to awake. So on one hand, it's a statement of the conditioned world that we live in, that we take to be so seriously and so profound and solid, is actually something more like a dream. And upon the awakening, many of the sages that awaken repeat the same expression. Strange indeed, here it is, just like this. It's truly as it is, and I've been asleep. And so they don't describe that they get anything or that they've been taught anything, but rather that they wake up to things as they really are. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And so they see that their previous confused state was like sleeping in a dream. And then suddenly through these spiritual exercises, something catalyzes and they wake up from the dream, and everything is both the same and yet profoundly different because they see things, they see through things, and they see the deep causes and conditions of existence, and what makes things go, why we're born and how we die. And this they describe as an awakening, not as a mystical union with something, not as some divine apprehension, but actually just a cold, straight awakening. And then they say, strange indeed, because they had thought that it was actually something more mysterious. And then they start to, when they say strange indeed, they say, how was it that I was asleep for so long? If you ever had that experience where you went for a long time under an illusion or some kind of myth, and suddenly you saw through it, and then you realize, wow, it's very simple and straightforward. Why didn't I see this earlier? Yes.
Isn't it described like a recollection? Like were they awake at one point and then fell asleep? Or is it a new experience entirely?
It's both. It's a recollection, but it's a new because they forgot for so long. It's like Rip Van Winkle.
Everyone was awake at one point?
Well, you're going to see in this text is that capacity for the awakened state is intrinsic. But, as he describes it, not just day to day, or week to week, or year to year, but lifetime to lifetime, we wander away from that awakening. We become very lost and adrift. The texts sometimes describe it. We wander as if drunken dreaming through a dark night, through a dense forest, unable to find our way, constantly looking for home, sensing there's some home, but we don't know how to find it, and so we stumble around. It's called the long night of samsara. And it's not just one evening. It can go on for a long, long time. So when they awaken, there's a kind of, I don't want to say rush, that's too hippie. There's a kind of exhilaration because suddenly, by metaphor, it's like you're swimming underwater, holding your breath, holding your breath. You can see the surface. You can see the light, but you can't quite get to you've been down so deep. And when you break that surface, that first breath is like, wow. And you go, I made it. And you're taking that first breath and it's like life itself. The longer you hold your breath, the more it's no longer a recollection, but a sudden thing. But then you remember, oh yeah, before I went under, I was breathing okay. So this absence from our natural awakened state over time makes it seem more and more distant, almost like a distant dream. And we can hardly hold on to it. We get glimpses of it now and again. It might come back early in the morning, Mencha says. When we're just waking up, we'll have a slight stirring. We'll remember this original ground that our original spiritual nature, but before the day's over, even before you get out of bed. Is if you got your radio tuned to wake you up to the news, it's all over at the first newscast, right? And it comes in and it says our nature gets chipped away and assaulted, just like deforesting the woods. And pretty soon we look at the woods and there's nothing there and we think it must have been always that way. But he said it wasn't. It just got chipped away but if you nurture it, let it go, take away the axes and the strip mining and everything, it'll return again. So this is a wonderful metaphor in this about, and I think it addresses your question. Depends on how long you've been away from it. Sometimes it's for people, it's every Friday to Friday. You know, we're here on Friday, it's pretty good. We read the sutra, everybody's good, and by next Friday you're going, whoa, I'm back, right? And sometimes it's just your daily sit. You do your daily sit, you feel centered, you feel close to the way, the Tao, and by the end of the day, it's gone. Next day, you sit again, and it returns. So this constant back and forth until you finally unite with it, and it becomes, how do I say, your baseline, your ground. And then what happens? Your entries into the world, into what I would call worldly confusion, seem like the dream, seem like the departure. Now, people who are watching you from the outside, who are really caught up in the world, say, what's wrong with you? You're getting weird. So when you're awakening, you're going, wow, this is wonderful. And the sages say, Shanzai, Shanzai. But your friends all say, man, you're weird. You don't want to smoke, you want to drink, you want to go to movies anymore. Because that to you seems like the dream. And the other thing, when you're centered and really in this space, that seems like fullness of life. The fullness, so it's really very funny how this stuff works. So anyways, he says, you've asked about the meaning, and he gives a phrase, the causes and conditions of the great matter. And we'll go back to talk about what this is. It's essentially what's presented in the text and the teaching as what is it that Buddhism is addressing? And it's called this one great matter. And the one great matter, there's two ways to interpret it. One way to interpret it, and my teacher does both, and the texts do both, is it addresses the human condition. That's the great matter. Nothing else. It's not a religious question. It's not about a divine insight or anything mysterious. It's about a basic human condition that these texts argue why they're classics never changes. Every human being, from the time of the Buddha before, through, and right to this day, and all the beings yet to be born, will enter into a human condition that has a big question, a great matter to it. What is that? Where do I go to school? Who do I marry? What's the question? What is, if I ask you, what is it that's universal in the human condition that hasn't changed, never changes, and we keep coming back to again and again and again? Why am I here? That's one aspect of it. The other question is, why can't I stay here? You follow? So it's sometimes talked about as life and death or birth and death. And what that means is, first, I'm here. I'm aware that I'm here. I know I'm here. At the same time, I'm surrounded by a situation that I also know that everything is changing. And then in a deeper way, sometime I won't be here. Now this is the one great matter. It's across tradition. You find people thinking and talking about this. We are born to die, and we know this. One of the French philosophers said, animals don't know this. They know when they're dying, and they know they die when they're dying, but they don't know in advance, consciously, that they're subject to this kind of mortality. We are. It's a bittersweet knowledge. We would like to not know that. Yes? But once you know that, you cannot not know that. No how much you cover it over, it's going to be there. And the Buddha said, largely the knowing of it and the trying to cover it over defines most of human activity. So the one great matter that the Buddha is talking about is that we are simply born in a contingent, and that's the Western term for it, but those of you who are familiar with Western philosophy, it's called the problem of contingency. Anybody know what contingency means? How many of you were forced to take Latin because you went to a Catholic school like I did? Okay. I didn't say how many of you joyously took Latin. Contingency, do you know what it means?
I know it's a situation that relies on another one.
You're right. So con means with, touching with. Contingency means dependent on. This is the basic meaning of it. So Western philosophers say it seems as if everything is happening by chance. It's uncertain. The postmodern expression of contingency is anything's possible, nothing's certain. And this is the vibration of the world of flux. In Buddhism, it's called impermanence is a face of it. It's called conditioned existence. The conditioned. Everything mutually depending on something else. But while that's true, it doesn't cause us to relax or be at ease, because it doesn't seem to be dependent upon us. And no matter how we try, unforeseen things continue to happen at every level. In the larger world, in terms of nature, in our relationships, and even in our psychic inner life. Who's in control? What's in charge here? And this contingency, this impermanence, this flux is what the Buddha began his quest on. He actually moved away from his culture and society that gave him the answers when he was young. They didn't fulfill his curiosity because he saw this very deeply. He saw this flux, this impermanence, this change. He saw aging, sickness, and finally saw death. And when he saw that, he asked, okay, what's the meaning? Can anybody tell me why there's meaning, and why would I would do anything if it's only ending like this? And because no one could answer, his parents could answer, he then went out in pursuit of this question to try to find an answer. So the other reason of the one great matter is the Buddha, upon resolving this issue, then the one great matter is he makes a commitment, and all sages make the same commitment to stay around and to share that method, to share the method for resolving that matter with anybody else. So the one great matter is, why do Buddhas and sages come forth in our lives, appear, or appear in the continuation of text and spiritual texts that lead us back through that dense forest, sort of serve as a pole star, because of this one great matter, human suffering. And the suffering isn't the suffering of poverty or pain, but it's a suffering of the contingency that even if we set it up so that we got it really comfortable, really smooth, it'll eventually get us. There's no escaping this. So, seemingly, okay, I'm going to say seemingly. I hate to, I'm not making you sound existentially totally depressed here. So he says, first of all, the Buddha nature is innate and whole within all of us, present here and now, and lacking nothing. So when he's talking about the one great matter in here, he's saying, there's the problem of human contingency. Everything's uncertain and up for grabs, and we are fading as we sit here. As we sit here, a certain amount of your brain cells are irreparably being lost. Okay? And as you get older, more and more are lost. And it's a frantic effort to replace them. I know they have programs out now. You can take drinks and vitamins to replace it. You can do all these, what do they got, these new things, even on the KQED they're selling them. What is it called? Yeah, see, you can't remember. You really need one of these.
You're making good money with that.
Yeah. It's something to stimulate your brain so it won't grow old. No, what are you laughing about? This is, if you come up with this marketing device, if you come up with anything that promises not to get old, you'll be a multimillionaire. Because the anxiety that's created by this is insatiable. You can really make, and people do make a lot of money. Health food stores that are selling elixirs of some form of eternal youth and immortality through pills and drugs and this organic and that, blah, blah, blah. And still, you're going to get old, wrinkled, hair's going to fall out, you're going to get sick and die. Even now, the new move, that's why some people say Western society's God is no longer God the Father of Genesis, but the science. Particularly technology that hopefully holds out the promise that it will find a cure for mortality. Through genetic manipulation of the cells, you'll be able to live forever. Now, not everybody would be happy with that. Well, I mean, no, you might be happy with you living forever, but there's other people you kind of wish that didn't, because, if everybody, yeah, just think about it. But I don't even know if we'd be happy living forever. That's an interesting, at what age would you like to live forever? Let's start there. 16? No, maybe 30? 60? Anyhow, this wish, this desire is where the Buddha's addressing. He says, so, the one great matter is that, but the other great matter is the answer to that. Unbeknownst to us, because we're still driven by anxiety over this, we're kind of spooked. We don't realize that a awakened nature, let's translate Buddha as the awakened nature, is innate and whole within us, right here and now. In other words, it's not outside, it's not something that has to be searched for. We're actually sitting on it, but don't realize it. And it's lacking nothing. This is very significant psychologically. What it is saying is your feeling of lack, your feeling of insecurity is actually a ruse. It's not real. You've spooked yourself into the state to think you're missing, but actually you're whole and complete. There's no lack. There's a Buddhist scholar practitioner, David Loy, who's written a book on Western history. And the essence of his argument is what's driving Western history is the anxiety of lack. That what is at the driving mechanism of our society is this perceived sense I don't have something that I need. And if only I use more energy and reach out more, I'll be able to fill the lack. So if you understand this, it's actually a Buddhist psychological insight. So he says it's whole and complete. However, and now the question is how long? He says since beginningless time. Now that's a what? If it's beginningless, then it's not time. Anybody? This is one of those phrases that we just mouth without really thinking. Well, what does that mean? Beginningless means also endless. So time is not a progression from one point to another having a beginning and end. It's a constant. And the only thing that moves or changes is our mind. Okay, so beginningless time, the deeply rooted seeds of craving, deluded thinking, emotional anxiety, and ingrained habits have polluted and obscured its wondrous brightness, this wondrous natural brightness. And thus we cannot make use of or realize its full expression. So he's saying, like Mencius says, when you find an area that's, give you an example, in the 1960s, the San Francisco Bay. When you go to the San Francisco Bay in the 1960s, there's garbage, dead fish floating on top. They're literally dumping garbage directly into the bay. You get what I mean? They're taking garbage trucks and going down there and dumping in the bay, and they want to fill up the bay eventually with garbage and cover it over and then sell it as real estate. So all of San Francisco and Oakland would, if something didn't happen, would now be what you see instead of the bay. You're going, whoa. And you would come, well, I wouldn't come because I can remember the 60s. I just remember them. I didn't do anything. I was just observing. But if you were born after the 60s, you wouldn't have even known. You would have taken a little kid now, an 8 and 9-year-old, and they wouldn't know that there was this beautiful bay there one time. They would have no idea. What would be the sign? You wouldn't need a bridge because it would all be landfill and garbage with condominiums and malls. And so you wouldn't even know the bay was there. In the same way, he's saying because of these deluded habits, polluted coverings over emotional anxiety and whatnot, we have covered over that bay and we no longer even think it's there. We wouldn't even know it was there. So this is where he's sort of starting it. He's saying we have this whole complete nature, but we ourselves, through a process of confusion and deeply ingrained habits, have now actually covered over that bright, wondrous nature with a lot of emotional anxiety, confusion, and desires and cravings and so on and so forth that don't bring any relief. This is the key. Because if they did bring relief, there'd be no point for this passage. But the point is they don't relieve the anxiety. And so yet we kept fueling it that way. Anybody want to know why the bay is still there?
Save the Bay.
Save the Bay. And what was Save the Bay?
It's an organization that I think was started by the wife of Clark Kerr of the campus over here. And a bunch of other work for women too.
3 women. 3 older women who heard about that they're going to fill the bay and dump with garbage and said over their tea, I don't think I'd like that.
And they had a nice view from their lovely house.
Right, they had a nice view and they didn't want it to go away. And they said, we're going to save the bay. And they were just laughed at. People just laughed at them and said, are you nuts? You're 3 women. You don't have any power political organization. Do you know the money that's behind filling in the bay? The governor himself, the former movie star, wants to do this. It's all done. It's a done deal. Forget it. And they did not lay down. They started writing letters. They started calling their friends. They had parties together. They started organizing. Before long, they had a massive movement that actually turned this about. And as a result, we still have San Francisco Bay. Now, do not look for these 3 women to save your bay. That's where the text is going. Hanshan saying you better do it yourself. Okay? So, Let me just unpack this a little bit because I think we can pass over this, but I'm going to argue that this first paragraph was in fact the actual teaching and experience of the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and it is passed along from generation to generation. And this isn't Chinese, it's not cultural, it's not historical, it's existentially here and now in the psychological moment that we are in. And if I can unpack this a little bit, I think you'll see where I'm going, because we get sense of this, but let's look at it just a little more deeply. First of all, what the text is saying implicitly is the anxiety that we feel when we face this contingency, and we all feel it. Is there anybody here who's never felt that fear and anxiety with the idea that this will go and fade? I will not be here at some point. And having seen it maybe directly through friends or relatives. We just lost a very, very close friend this week. A wonderful doctor who treated Hung Chur and I for years. On the day he died at 85, he still gave free medical care to people that depended on him in Los Angeles. After treating 3 patients, he fell over and died of a massive heart attack. So right to the very end, no retirement, no condo in the Caribbean. He just worked and worked and worked, and he passed away. And I was like, another shock just comes to you when this happens. Someone who took care of me and kept my body whole has himself passed away. So there's a Chinese poem that says, when someone dies, my heart burns with fire, not because they have gone, but because death is coming to me. So on one hand, I felt this loss of this close friend, physician. On the other hand, it was a wake-up call. Well, I'm not 85. I'm not 75. Right? But then today I was going through my mementos and it was, happy birthday, Marty. 20 years old. Well, I'm not 20 either. So much as I kept that card, I didn't keep any years. They just roll on and roll on. So this anxiety is at the heart, the Buddha says, of the human condition. How we respond to it then is the key to our lives. There's different ways to respond. Like? Anybody?
Panic.
What?
Is it panic?
Panic.
Hedonism?
Hedonism. Eat, drink, and to be merry because tomorrow I know I will die. Grab the gusto now. This is what the American advertising system's all about. You deserve it. Life's short. Indulge yourself. You only go around once. Bye-bye. And then when you get the Cadillac and you're slurping down the chocolate, why aren't you happy? Because you know the Cadillac will also fade, the chocolate will be gone, and you will too, and so it doesn't relieve the anxiety. So hedonism, also the big one is denial. Forms of denial. I don't want to think about it. And then the Buddha said this is what leads to incredible busyness. And the sixth patriarch said, a frantic passage through life will end with bitter regret. So the frantic busyness, which in our world passes as success, entrepreneur. You're really doing something with your life. You work 3 jobs. You only sleep 4 hours. You're piling up money, right? And yet, in the end, all gone. All gone. And so, denial, hedonism, whatnot is a response. The Buddha said this is the major cause of craving or desire, anxiety. So while we think desire is the problem, it actually is a symptom of a deeper problem, this anxiety. The wish to have, to hold, to keep, to possess, to retain, to remain and not fade and vanish like everything we see around us, this is what gives rise to wanting, to craving, to attaching. And the Sanskrit for this is graha. Graha, which means literally to grasp, to reach. That's where the English word grab comes from. Grasp comes from graha. So we reach out to grasp because we can feel everything fading. We can feel ourselves as if floating away. And so we reach out to hold on, thinking. We can then hold on by holding on to something. And so we pile up possessions, material things. portfolios, investments. And yet, no matter how good they are, the market crashes. The insurance company can only give somebody else the money when you die. Oh, it's a funny expression, life insurance. Yeah, I would like to buy some life insurance. Does that insure my life? Well, not exactly. It ensures that when you die, somebody else will get some money. Oh, is there any real life insurance? I don't know of it. Yes, you can buy that freezing stuff with nitrogen. Cryonics, cryogenics, right. So you can freeze your body, and then when science comes up with a cure with whatever you had, you can be thawed out again. Okay? And I told you the truth about this. Some of you laughed at it, but the truth is if you can't afford a full body cryogenics, they have a special layaway plan. You just leave your head. And then they promise from your head they'll get you a new body. Okay? So, anxiety causes the craving and desire. And one of the examples the Buddha gave of this, by the way, you probably don't know this, the Jataka tale. You all know the story about the sky is falling, hit me on the head, Chicken Little in the Western sense. You all know this story? Chicken Little? Okay. But it's actually a Buddha's Jataka, and it's not about a chicken. But anyway, a fruit falls from the tree. I forget who's under the tree. It might be maybe a monkey. And the monkey freaks out and looks up and says, oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end. A piece of the universe fell and hit me on the head. Impermanence. And so he goes and tells the lion. And the lion just goes roar, announcing everybody, the world is coming to an end, the sky is falling. And after, you know the story, all the animals start getting excited and they're all stampeding. And finally they come to the tree where the Buddha said, and you go, whoa, 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 hold it. What's wrong? Where's everybody going? Oh, the sky's falling. And the Buddha said, who told you? Well, that guy behind me, you know, the giraffe. And the giraffe says, well, the donkey. And the donkey goes back and finally, it's the monkey. And the Buddha says, yes, did it happen? Oh, yes. And the Buddha said, let's go back and take a look. So they go back and he said, where's the sky? I don't know. There's just this breadfruit. Kaiwula, awakening. The sky wasn't falling after all. It was just a piece of fruit that hit me on the head. And the Buddha said, your desires in the same way chase you along when you think of this anxiety that's generated by impermanence. In fact, it's not real, or it's not what you think it is. Now, the other part of this, if we're going to get into the psychology, desire causes anxiety. So it works both ways. Why? Because desire that's coming when we move away, what he says, from this natural fullness, when we sense the lack, comes from feeling needy and vulnerable and dependent and lacking. We're out on a limb. Moreover, at the deeper way, when you read, you'll say it's saying we're unsure of our own worth. So the desire, the wanting, leaves a feeling of us of not being sure of our own worth, that we're lacking. And so we both want and resent the objects of our desire. Now, this is very subtle, but it's true. The objects of desire that we want, we also resent because they remind us that we feel as if we're lacking and not whole and complete. And so that's the tension in love and having. The result is not feeling free, never at ease. Whether we're wanting or getting, it just turns into a vicious cycle of discontent. And this is what is called dukkha. So dukkha, translated as suffering, is only a superficial definition. What it's talking about is this deep psychological, almost unconscious, ill-at-ease feeling we have of knowing that everything passes away and then desiring to make it not do that, yet knowing in the desiring that we cannot really stop it. And so it becomes, this is a psychological definition of samsara, going on and on and on, dukkha. And the Buddha in the Lotus Sutra says, and we try to use dukkha to end dukkha. We try to use suffering to end suffering. So we go out and try to accumulate which is the source of it, to end it, but it just fuels it again and again. Wow. Now, this could be depressing, but cheer up, it's not. We're only dealing with the first of 4 truths. So the Buddha, if the Buddha stopped here, man, this would be the most depressive philosopher ever. And there are philosophers who stop there. Life sucks, man. You're born to die. What's the meaning? No, the Buddha says that's true from one angle, but let's figure out what's the cause of that. And most people say, well, the cause is out there. Life bears down on me. Life rolls on over me. And the Buddha says, right, but you're in paradigm paralysis. If you look at it from another way, you're the problem, and you're the solution. So this is a very interesting first passage that Hanshan is coming to. He's really hitting it strong. If we can understand both the desire and the anxiety, we're really close to understanding our condition. This is not something, the Buddha or the Bodhisattvas of the past or people in India at this time. What I describe is something I know personally. It's at the core of my being that vibes and I wrestle with. And I'm guessing it's somewhere at the core of yours. That as much as we make our lives in some way, this thing is still there, still gnawing, still asking, and we're still trying some way to resolve it. So I asked Locke if he would put up, I wanted to show you an example that this is not necessarily just a Buddhist insight, but it's an insight that we find across the world. And this one, I'm sharing with you Sonnet 64 by the Beastie Boys. No, who? Yeah, remember Bill Shakespeare? Remember Bill? Bill was the nomination for the party, and no. And Bill lived at the same time as Hanshan. So while Hanshan was writing this, William Shakespeare was having a contemplation. And these are his sonnets. So let's take a look at this, and you'll see he's getting at a very subtle restatement of what the Buddha is saying in the first truth of dukkha and what Hanshan is saying here. So I will unpack this a little bit because I know for some of you, this English is not street talk, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's look at it. When I have seen by times felt, we'll just read through once. When I have seen, you got to get the rhythm of this. This is what we're trying to do when we translate Chinese to English, and we haven't gotten it yet. You know, like Chinese verses, bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. When we translate it, it's bum, 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 bum. David Rounds is really trying to make it lyrical. But this is translates this in Chinese, and something would be lost, I'm afraid. Anybody got the program? Where you just enter this in and let the Chinese translate? And people are going, what is that? Read the English. When I have seen by times fell hand to face the rich proud cost of outworn buried age, when sometime lofty towers I see down raised and brass eternal slave to mortal rage, when I have seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore, and the firm soil wind of the water remain, increasing store with loss and loss with store, when I have seen such interchange of state, or state itself confounded to decay, ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate, that time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death which cannot choose but weep to have that which it fears to lose. Okay, this is Shakespeare. This is English. This is not what you send to your girlfriend. It's not a love sonnet, and yet it is. So he says, let's go line by line. So just unpack. When I've seen by times fell hand to face. What's times fell hand? Times capital. Yeah, father time. Time. The fell hand, like the axe coming down. Okay, you see the Grim Reaper in the cartoons? The guy with the hood and that's the fell hand of time. Okay, when I've seen times fell hand to face what? The rich proud cost of war and buried age. What's that? Fallen civilizations, the glories of the Rome, the Colosseums, the pyramids, rich proud cost, proudly put up to last forever, and now they're ruins, drawing tourists with their cameras. When I sometimes lofty towers see down raised, in other words, high, mighty buildings and towers. In China, it's the great ancient pagodas. Or you go to India and sometimes to Burma, you'll see the stupas crumbling down. When I read this, a friend of mine sent me a thing of 9/11. The modern version of lofty towers down raised. And brass, eternal, slave to mortal rage. What does that mean? So brass seems to be lasting and eternal, but it is a slave to the rage of mortality. Even brass will fade away. That's why they tell you when you go to get your coffin, do you want just a box? Because that'll go away really fast. Of course, if you get the bronze, it'll last a little longer, but So why don't you get the titanium? It's a little expensive, but you deserve it. You'll be a lot more comfortable. You won't worry about bugs coming in to eat you. You're going, yeah, I like that. What, are you nuts? You're dead. What does it matter? When I've seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore, what does that mean? Erosion, right? And this is before global warming, folks. You're going to see a lot more advantage of the kingdom of the shore. And the firm soil, wind of the water remain. What's that? Hawaii. New islands come up and displace the water, but then the water takes past the island again. He's watching. Increasing store means what's there with loss, and the loss gets stored. So empty, full, empty. Lunchtime. Let's get it existential here. Increasing loss with store and store with loss. I won't describe the details of this, but I'll tell you, Xu Yun gave a wonderful kaisha at Shanghai. And he basically made this point. He says, you all come to do Chan, and all you do is think about lunch. Lunch, baozi, jiaozi, blah, 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 blah. And then he says, you go and you stuff yourselves. And then you fall asleep in Chan, and so the one great matter is gone. And then he says, you all go to the toilets and then dump it all out again. And then you start thinking of food again until the next meal. And he said, all that stuff you dumped out, because this is China, remember, goes to fertilize the food that you're going to eat. So he said, did that wake you up? Think about that. And they do. When I've seen such interchange of state, meaning the back and forth of all this, brass to rust, towers down raised, store with losses, I watch this constant and permanent flux. Or state itself confounded to decay. Very interesting. What's this? Government, countries, empires, itself going down. That doesn't happen anymore. Whoa. The map is constantly changing. The president one day is in prison the next. The prisoner is the president. Right. He says, when I see all of this, he says, ruin, this decay has taught me to cultivate, to contemplate. Ruminate. What is ruminate? Yeah, it comes from, see, I'm coming from Wisconsin. Chewing the cud. That's what cows do. They chew their cud. They swallow it, and then they drag it up and chew it again. And they put it down, and they swallow it again and bring it up again. Sorry, it's not dinner time. Don't worry. That's what cows do. But it's also a phrase that Sherpa would use, and it's used for da wang shan. False thinking. You bring it up again, you chew it, goes down, you bring it up again, you chew it, on and on and on and on. Okay? He says, it's taught me to ruminate, that time will come and take my love away. So the beginning, when I have seen times, time will come and take my love away. Now he's been talking about shores and states and bronze, but he's saying my love. What's his love?
His love.
Well, I just heard somebody say his love, romantic, and himself. Someone said, what is it that you love?
His life, his breed.
His life, his girlfriend, himself. No, this is what, I mean, come on. We live in a narcissistic world. We say we love others, but that's just because we pretend they love us, which is really the focus. The focus is on me. I love to be loved. If I don't get the love back, I love somebody else. So love is fairly fickle. Sorry. Even if you do the ring thing, the ring will last, the love may not. It could be his career. It could be his writing. Whatever we love and cling to, we have to remember that time will come and take that away. So now his last line, in the sonnet, it's the two last lines, just in haiku, where the last line in haiku is turning. These two last lines pull it together and shoot it up to the next dimension. So then he says, last two lines, this thought, what thought? That it will be taken, time will come to take away, is as a death, paralysis. It freezes me, and I cannot choose, but weep to have that which it fears to lose. In other words, there's a melancholy, a sadness, knowing that when I get it, I also know that I can't keep it, it will fade away. And I hear people talk about this. They say, if I fall in love, I will have that joy or pleasure, but also I know at the moment that it also will go from me. And so my father, when he was getting old, he said, I hope I go before your mother goes, because I couldn't stand to live without her. And of course, she says the same thing. But it's this, once you love and hold, you also know it will be taken away. Even children, the joy of having children, you watch them go, and pretty soon they go away. Everything that we try to hold on to will go away. And he says it's like a paralysis. I weep, I resist to grab out that which I know I will lose. And yet I still want to grab out because I want to have. And he's describing this dilemma at the root of the human condition. He's not a Buddhist. But this could have been written by a sage. Okay? So what I'm pointing to, the universality of this, the subtlety of this, and to be a fully human is to wrestle with this, and it's also the same with what it means to be a Buddhist, is to wrestle with this. So the next thing Han Shan's going to go, and he's going to unpack this more, but he's actually going to then bring out the methodology to use to get out of this conundrum. Interesting stuff. I'll end with a true story illustrating this. It's kind of funny, I think, and you might have heard it before. When I was in graduate school, I became friends with an Indian student. This was in the Midwest. It was very, very cold, and he was miserable. He'd grown up in a country where the average temperature usually is in the 90s and 100, and he had acclimated to it. And then he came to study at our school where it was minus 20. And so I usually found him sitting next to the radiator in the library, with 3 coats on, shivering. And so we began talking, and he talked about his adjustment to America. And his father, he came from a very strict Hindu tradition that was vegetarian. And so when he told his father, I'm going to America to study, his father went, no, you can't. And he said, why? Why, father? Do you know they eat cows there? His father was completely shocked. And he said, I'll try not to do that. I'll try to stay away from eating cows. Well, where we were, that's what they mostly ate. It was really hard for him to find vegetarian food because they eat cows and pigs and chicken in various forms. So he was really kind of alone among us. We became friends, and then he told me, he said his father was a teacher, and he had many students, and one of his students was very bright and eager, and when he heard that he had come to America, the father's son, he wanted to come to America too. And so I said, well, why did he want to come? And he said, it's really funny. Ever since he was growing up, this is a number of years ago, his idea of America was where they had milkshakes. You hear the streets are paved with gold and milk and honey flows through the rivers, all these things. But you think sometimes desires come down to something very simple. Peanut butter, a spring roll. Why do you want to go to Vietnam? A spring roll. He wanted a milkshake. He had seen the ads on TV when TV came to India, and he saw these things, these big cold things of ice cream, and people were sucking them down, and he didn't know what the flavor was because he couldn't find one. So when he came to the United States, he meets my friend. He said, "We got to go and have a milkshake. Got to have a milkshake." He says, "Okay." So they go down to the local dairy thing on the corner, and it goes in. Of course, there's all these signs: small, medium, large. Whoa, large! I want the big milkshake. And he's watching, and they bring the milkshake, and it's like it's dribbling down the side, and the water's running. And he gives him a straw, and he says, "What do I do?" He says, "You put it in your mouth and suck on it." So he bends over and he's like that, and it's like, oh my God, nirvana. It's really, and he's sitting there, and the guy's saying, finally, he's got it. And he gets about halfway, and then he stops, and he can't do anything. He's just stopped like that, like he's paralyzed. This thought is as a death which cannot choose. And his friend says, "What's wrong? Don't you like it?" He says, "No, I like it a lot." He says, "Well, why did you stop?" "Because it's disappearing." He says, "If I don't suck on it, I won't enjoy it, but if I do, it'll be gone." And he sat there. And this guy's going, but this is the description in a humorous way of that reality. When we have it, we don't want to take it because it'll be gone, but if we don't, is this really a conundrum or what? So there's both humor and pathos at the heart of our condition. And this is really, in a funny way that's what the one great matter is. The Buddha's saying, while you're stuck there, there's no freedom, there's no at ease, and there's just this constant cycle of anxiety, desire, and there's a way to break out of that. And that's where the Dharma starts to go now. And I will say that the way to break out of it is just as pragmatic and straightforward as this description here. So what we're trying to do is to unpack this, take out the mystification and the enculturation, and get down to the key psychological, spiritual terms here that would be accessible to anyone at once. And Hanshan does it. He's really direct in that way. So next week we'll continue to go into this and unpack it some more. Enjoy a milkshake in the meantime. Any announcements? Anything coming up here that people want to announce?
Tomorrow, our Storky Bodhisattva's birthday.
Oh, is there a celebration here?
No. In San Francisco, Go Mountain Moms.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So tomorrow is the anniversary of Didzan Pusa, Kashita Garba, the Bodhisattva, in that stained glass there, which you can't see very well, but standing on the lotus fire in the fires, representing a Bodhisattva who vows to go to the most untenable places to rescue living beings for the one great matter. This turns out to be the realms of hells and suffering. By the way, you shouldn't think about these as being someplace in an underworld, in Hades or someplace. In the Buddhist sense, the hells are also a state of mind. And you can be right in the middle of Berkeley and still be in the hells. Really? Yeah. So you need to think about it not as some kind of distant place that I hope I don't go to, and if I get asbestos, that'll be cool. But you have to think of it, it's a psychological state I can enter any time by stepping away from my true nature and getting lost in the shuffle. And it can truly become hellish. So, yes. Is that a question?
No.
Oh.
It's an announcement. So,
Okay.
No, I believe there's a student, like a roundtable for people below 35.
Oh, we've been through this. What'd you say?
And actually, all the people who kind of like know more about it are gone at a retreat. So, does it start at 7:30 to 9?
Yeah, there's a roundtable discussion here. Usually Hung Sure will lead it and some of the other monks. And it's a kind of informal gathering where you can just sort of talk about Buddhism through a more contemporary lens. And they're meeting every other Thursday night here. So it won't be this Thursday, but the next Thursday, right?
Yeah.
Because I believe they met last Thursday.
So it's not coming Thursday. The coming Thursday.
Not this one? Oh, yeah, this one coming up because they did meet yesterday. Right. And then Saturday night is the Avatamsaka lecture with Hung Sure. That's here. So we have a Friday night, Saturday night, there's Thursday night roundtable. I think Doug Powers has a class here every other Monday night dealing with causality and karma. If you're interested in... No?
12 links this semester.
12 links.
Yeah, he's going to compare that from Mahayana Sutra and the Theravada Sutras. try to see any differences or any common ground.
If you know Doug, he does mine on a Theravada comparisons, and then he drops in Western philosophy. And so you're getting a real splice of two ancient traditions with a modern tradition in a discourse. And he goes really fast. That's on every other Monday night. If you talk to Ken, she'll know the schedule and the dates, the one who said we love ourselves. Yeah. Okay, so at the end now, we're going to do a transference of merit and virtue, and it'll be up there, and we do it in English.
Our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise.
In peace and love.